That was terrifically interesting. Thank you, all of you. Ethan Nadelman raised a point that I'm glad he brought up, that at least one country, and maybe two, Portugal and the Czech Republic, have made this step to experimenting with decriminalization, which means out there is some actual empirical data on what happens to a society when these policies are introduced. And I wonder, does the panel know how it's working out?
Yeah, let me, first of all, it's very important to distinguish, as most of us did, I think, between decriminalization and legalization, right? Legal regulation, like Alex talked about. With respect to decriminalization of possession only, while keeping the rest the same, the evidence by and large shows that levels of drug use go up and down independent of the harshness of the drug laws themselves, right, in an open society. The leading book, research book by Peter Reuter and Rob McCune, Drug War Heresies, looks at the comparative research and comes to that conclusion, right? The leading analysis of the Portugal experiment, 12 years ago, the Portuguese decided essentially to end the criminalization. I mean, it's technically in the law still somewhat criminalized, but nobody goes to jail for simple drug possession. They get sent to a health board, they're encouraged to go to a health program to get treatment, but they're not drug tested or locked up if they persist in using drugs. The leading piece in the British Journal of Criminology by Alex Stevens and Caitlin Hughes found essentially no increase of note in drug use. What you saw was some ages going up, a little bit down, but by and large, things like overdose, HIV and Hep C conversions, criminality, arrests, all generally tending down. The leading study of the experience in the United States, when 11 states decriminalized marijuana possession in the 70s, actually by a Canadian scholar, Eric Singal, and published in 1985, he looked at those 11 states, he looked at the other 39 that had not decriminalized, and what he found essentially was that marijuana use went up across the country, in both decrim and non-decrim states in the 70s, and then down in the 80s. He didn't see, so essentially what shapes levels of drug use in decriminalization or criminalization has more to do with fad, fashion, availability than it has to do with the harshness of the laws. When it comes to marijuana, what the Uruguay has done is just the House of Representatives last month said, let's legally regulate this, more or less what Washington and Colorado proposed to do. The law will presumably be enacted by the Senate and the President later on this year, and then we'll see, and there will be analysis. Ditto in Washington and Colorado. The fact of the matter is that when you do go to legalization in the broader sense, you do present an increased risk of higher numbers of users and potentially higher harm as well. So that risk is there, right? Then again, you look at the Dutch, which essentially made in 1976 changed their law, toughened up on the powder drugs, the harder drugs, so to speak, and allowed coffee shops, the coffee shops emerged in the late 70s and early 80s. What you saw there was that cannabis levels in the Netherlands essentially tracked those in the rest of Europe, going up during some periods, down during some periods, and remained significantly below the levels of use in the United States and a range of other countries where there are harsher laws. On the innovations, like things like needle exchange, heroin prescribing, I don't think there's much debate there, that there's no indication that those things actually increase levels of use. I would just put on the side there, one thing to keep in mind, and this is Peter, and I would agree on this point of the issue of overdoses involving opiates, both illegal opiates and the pharmaceutical opiates. My organization is deeply involved in trying to address this issue in various ways. That is, in fact, a very serious problem in that way, but what he didn't so much talk about, I don't think, or Michelle, is the problems that result in two respects from prohibitionist markets. One, which Larry and I noted, is the fact that when drugs are produced illegally, they're adulterated. There are all sorts of harms. Alcohol's bad enough, but illegal alcohol causing, poisoning, blinding people drinking grain alcohol, all this sort of stuff, there is a real harm. The other thing I would say is there's a wonderful article in the Archives of General Psychiatry back in the 70s or 80s, I think it was, by Joseph Westermeyer. It's called The Pro-Heroin Effects of Anti-Opium Laws. And what he did was he looked in both Southeast and Southwest Asia, which had opium control systems in the late 19th and first half of the 20th century, mostly elderly people going, fairly well regulated, this sort of thing. And then under pressure from the League of Nations, then the UN, from my government, these things were shut down in Southeast Asia, Southwest Asia. What happened? You saw a significant drop in opium consumption among the elderly, and within a few years in every country, a straight increase in heroin and its use by younger people. The drug more compact, more lucrative, easier to smuggle, easier to consume more discreetly, and you can track the similar patterns of crackdowns on marijuana in the Caribbean and Colombia moving to cocaine. There's a Justice Department study in my country of how the crackdown in Hawaii on marijuana led to an increase in meth labs, all of this sort of variable. Okay. So bottom line, decrim does not increase use. Legalization, we don't know, but the benefits of getting rid of the harms of prohibition are
okay. Michelle, did you want to comment?
Okay, first thing I want to clarify, are we getting points for entertainment? Because if we are, I think our team might be a little bit in the hole. On facts, I think we're going to be perhaps, on the issue of Portugal, I think it's interesting because it's the devil's in the detail and all this stuff. We all have this semantic judo. Portugal is held on the pedestal as the place to be, and the certainly decriminalization aspect. What Portugal recent report, most recent, and it's one report. So what does it really mean if we look at it on a trend basis? But EMCDDA report confirms that in fact prevalence has gone up in the last slice of examination in Portugal. Do we hit the panic button? No, but let's not assume that it automatically goes down or goes up. And I think we have to contextualize the Portuguese experience. It was really around problematic heroin users that they moved towards a decriminalized approach. It's a smaller country. It's about going to dissuasion panels. Anybody who is arrested goes to these panels and you have a discussion as to whether you want to go to treatment or not. Is it even functionally affordable or doable here? So I think we can import a lot of ideas and suggestions. Ethan's very right. The severity of the law has very little bearing on the actual prevalence. And if you look at some of the United States or Canada, very different sort of prevalence. So, I think devil's in the detail. What are we truly trying to accomplish? And, we can find numbers that go up and down all the time. But generally speaking, I think we need to look at some real factors of harm, overdose being one of them, as the other ones that we tried to unbundle.
Okay, let's have brief questions and brief answers. Go ahead.
Question and a comment. The question I had was exactly around that, whether there is any credible evidence that criminal sanctions reduce the prevalence of use. I don't think there is in terms of most of the research on, certainly on marijuana use, that variations in criminal sanctions in terms of making it a criminal offense have much impact on the prevalence of use. I'll be interested in the comments on that. The second thing is that if we move to the issue of legalization, it seems to me that we at least avoid the dangers that have been prevalent both in the US and Canada of police using their discretion to use the law in some way to control various populations. And in particular, we know in the US that most of the drug laws have been applied inequitably to minority groups, and we can expect the same, I think, would happen here.
Can I start off? Yeah. I'll be shorter. On the criminal sanctions bit, I think the first one is perhaps there's no conclusive, and maybe Ethan has it and others, in terms of, demonstrably showing that criminal sanctions will reduce, prevalence of any particular substance. It's like saying, does education work in prevention? And education gets a really bad rap on a lot of things, and you say, well, education in of itself perhaps is not sufficient. So where does the criminal justice measure fit within the broader scheme of how we want to address the issue, I think is a more important sort of way of contextualizing the issue. And again, the severity of the penalty is only as important as the certainty with which it will be applied. We have fairly severe cannabis possession laws in this country that are not being applied. So how is that having any effect in terms of the prevalence? And in respect of the legalization and allowing, therefore, for the lack of targeting, as just paraphrasing, I think we have to, I think that is an issue that has to be unbundled in terms of the discretion of police. Discretion of police powers in Canada have been slowly eroding and changing over time and becoming smaller, in fact, and much more narrow. By the same token, it's not jury and execution in police, we do have police courts, and we have courts, and we have a judicial system that wraps around and ultimately engages on that. And if you look at the statistics in terms of cannabis arrests versus actual incarceration or what have you, you'll see that there is a fair amount of clear out. I'm not suggesting it's all appropriate, but there's a fair amount of clear out through the court system. So I'm not sure on that second point.
Senator?
Oh, sorry.
Well, I would hesitate to point out, but there's always been a court system in place in all of our countries, and that hasn't done anything. And, lest we sit here smug as Canadians, we should not forget that our First Nations are way overrepresented and many in our prison system, and many of them are in there for drug-related. I really think that at the end of the day, it goes down to Ethan's statement regarding the harm. I mean, what we want to try to do is get rid of the harm that is ongoing. And, we can get into, well, it's, weed is natural, weed isn't natural. I think that the more important point is how much harm is being caused by marijuana. And the doctor says that we don't know yet. We'll never know. I mean, everybody does research here. The research continues and goes on. One of the biggest problems we have with regards to marijuana is there is no research. It's been illegal everywhere, so nobody could actually study it. So we don't know anything about it, virtually nothing. And my hope is through the legalization process, we actually treat this like a pharmaceutical. We take it apart. We figure out, why does it work in certain areas? Everybody gets stoned. But why does it work specifically for people who have, for instance, a form of MS or arthritis? And what does that? From my point of view, that's the biggest thing about our laws that are being changed now with regards to medical marijuana. It will finally give us an opportunity to figure out, is this all bogus? Is it just a high, or what's going on?
Yes, unfortunately, that's not the way it works. And many of us in this audience know about how drugs are developed and the testing that they undergo. Having so-called medical marijuana readily available has undercut funding to develop medical cannabinoids that are compounds that are specifically targeted to meet health ends, where side effects are better identified and known. Two entirely different things. There's a lot of work that needs to be done on medical cannabinoids. Unfortunately, we've undercut funding for that. Who's going to produce a medical product to compete with smoked marijuana? It's going to be very difficult.
Well, with all due respect here, let's get serious, okay? Pharmaceuticals aren't looking into this because it's a natural occurring substance, and they cannot get their fingers on it. They cannot own it. And we have synthetic cannabinoids now. I have no personal experience, but I understand that it's nowhere near as effective as marijuana. So the issue isn't pharmaceuticals, the money going away from pharmaceuticals. There is simply no interest in looking at marijuana and the various cannabinoids unless you can synthesize them, and I can then put a name on it, and I can then make money off it. So I've never seen evidence that says that money's being diverted because of legal marijuana.
Well, let me just add to that. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if did Dr. Sanjay Gupta's special on marijuana, the CNN special, make it up to Canada? I mean, that was really a major thing there, and he in his public apologia about how he had got it wrong initially. But I have to say with Peter, if I just make a couple of comments about what you said and relevant to your question as well. The first is, look, we can agree on the absurdity of 28-day programs and the need to integrate drug treatment into regular medical care and the good reasons why we want to prevent a greater increase in drug addiction. We can agree on all that. What was striking to me about your talk was the virtual absence of any discussion of the harms of prohibition, of the massive incarceration, the multi-$100 billion black market, the violence in Mexico, or what the questioner talked about, the way that these laws are inevitably enforced in ways that are discriminatory. What was powerful in my country was if you randomly stop 100 100 black kids, brown kids, and white kids, 100 of each, the same percent will have marijuana in their pocket. But in almost every place in America, you got the black kids getting stopped more often. I think the second thing is the benefits of sensible regulation. You say you want to mock the government. Could this government sensibly regulate? Therefore, a government that can sensibly regulate, you'd prefer to have them spend 10 times the money on a ridiculous government-run prohibition policy? Why is an ineffective government idiotic prohibition policy preferable to an idiotic regulatory law? Thirdly, on the marijuana thing, when Bayer Pharmaceutical is spending chunks of money investing in GW Pharmaceutical, the leading research on the pharmaceuticalization of marijuana, I think this research is happening already. If people want to be able to, to take their medicine through a vaporizer or whatever, God bless them. But this research, in fact, is happening. And finally, I agree with, I think, everyone in the panel that what we do about the stimulant drugs and the new club drugs is a growing and emerging challenge. There's a new word that's been coined last year or two. It's called the alphabetamines. Right? In other words, amphetamine-like substances where the people are experimenting with the formulas with different, and so they're in the gray area of the law. Well, one thing that's very interesting is that Uruguay is not just the only country breaking new ground, or my country with marijuana regulation. The other country to keep your eye on is New Zealand. New Zealand, because of its isolated location, club drugs, synthetic drugs, that's more commonly used there relative to other drugs than anywhere else in the world. What they did, they kept trying to go after the manufacturers. A few months ago, with bipartisan consensus, the Parliament enacted a new law that will allow the producers of these drugs that are used primarily for recreational purposes to go through an approval process like our FDA approval in the United States or whatever it is similar that you have here, and that if they can demonstrate, I don't know if they'll test efficacy, but if they can demonstrate safety, it'll be a way of ensuring that the drugs that young people are using and that cannot be stopped by prohibitionist controls at least are as undangerous as possible. So there are new approaches emerging.
Can I just...
10 seconds.
So I was in New Zealand. I negotiated and chaired their National Drug Policy Consensus Conference 3 weeks ago. And indeed, the whole legal highs market was very present. But nobody at the table said, let's extend this to other illicit drugs. Nobody thought it was a regime that was even appropriate to discuss. And I think they're trying to do catch-up on legal highs and to see. It's very innovative, no question. And the last point about violence in Mexico, I don't think we can put every ill that's before Mexico, as important as it is, at the feet of drug policy. I think we have to look at this on a much broader scale, and the violence and the investment around the enforcement is a choice. Nobody's putting a gun to the government's head to spend billions of dollars in the Americas on, that's a choice that the U.S. has made for years. How they de-escalate, that's another question.
Okay, nobody move because it's starting to get good now.
Yeah,
We actually
I have a
are...
very quick question. Do you mind if I ask you? One very quick question.
Very quick.
Very quick, yeah. I'm sorry for making it personal. Imagine that you have a 15-year-old boy or girl, and I would much appreciate if you answer yes or no so that we finish it. Would you mind if this child of yours smokes ad libitum either cannabinoids or cocaine at home? Yes or no?
Were you asking? Sorry?
If you had a 15-year-old boy or girl at home, would you mind if they smoke marijuana in front of you or take cocaine ad libitum? Yes or no?
I have a 20-year-old and a 17, and it's no, I don't want them using those substances.
The panelists?
I have a 16-year-old, and I say no, but that's not the issue. The issue is I would not allow that because they're under 19. They are not in a position to be making their own, and that's why the education is so important. Are they smoking it right now? Possibly, probably.
And the question we have to ask, because I agree, I don't want my 15-year-old, although
No.
she turns 25 today, but I mean, I don't, the question I ask you is if your 18-year-old or 16-year-old or 15-year-old is gonna be drinking with his friends that night, no matter what, do you want him in your backyard and you take away everybody's keys or whatever, or do you want them going out someplace where they're gonna do it anyway and there's no adult around?
And I would engage in a discussion around why are they using? What's underlying this?
Okay, here we go. Last
Yeah,
comment.
that's.
Thanks for asking this question because I feel that there is a big gap in this argument, and that is it all stops at 18, right? And so for the majority of users of illicit substances or cannabis and alcohol, you are advocating making it illegal for them. And right, is that what I'm understanding so it's still illegal. But yet your argument is that it's harmful to make an activity illegal. But for the majority of young people, you're not suggesting a different policy.
No,
And
but
I feel that you're not fully committed to your argument if you're not applying the same logic to just, a population who's
I don't want my daughter smoking. I don't want my daughter drinking. I don't want her getting in trucks with 10-inch lifted kits. I don't want her being involved in that. But I also recognize that I would want her to be able to come to me and we could talk about this in a fashion and that she becomes educated. But we have to set some, what you're suggesting is I would be a libertarian. Let her go. Like, we don't draw the line at anything. We've decided that the age is 19. Maybe the age is 17. I don't know what it is.
No, I think
that legalization is safer for adults 18 plus and not safer for anyone under 18.
Well,
I don't think there's evidence
it's safer on at many levels. It's safer on, I can tell you what's in the product. I can tell you that the money is not going to gangs. I can tell you that the houses aren't going to be burning down because you got grow-ops going in. There's all kinds of other ills that are involved over and above just the use of the substance.
I think this is, and certainly Ethan will speak on it more, I think this is the Achilles heel of a regulated system or a decriminalized system, is that there's always a cutoff. Colorado has a cutoff for 21. And I asked, so what happens if you're under 21? There's still a black market. Of course there's going to be. But some would say, well, look at the alcohol market. It's very different today. It's more difficult to access alcohol than it is pot. Yeah, but most of the kids don't go ask mom for the potato skins and have a still in the basement and make their own booze. It's a lot easier to grow your own pot. So I think the whole notion of what happens under 21 is reasonably a good question. Say, well, how does that square with your argument on the go forward above that age? Yeah, try that.
I guess what I would just say to it is, yeah, you're right. There is, I actually go out when I speak to people on college campuses who are involved in drug policy reform, I apologize to them. I say, I apologize for the fact that when we're drafting these ballot initiatives to legalize marijuana, that we're making it 21. And the reason we're doing it at 21 instead of 18 is because the polling suggests that there's no way that we can win public support if we make the marijuana age lower than the alcohol age, even though there might be public health reasons for doing that. If you ask me about the age limit, ask me about the issue of what should the age limit be on alcohol. I think the 21-year-old one, there's some evidence it helps about, driving problems with young people. There's other elements that shows that, binge drinking is exacerbated by it. There's a reason why hundreds of American university presidents have advocated for lowering the drinking age. You go to parts of Europe where you actually don't really have a drinking age, and how does that work? So I don't have a strong position on that, but I'll tell you this. My basic message with respect to young people, teenagers, and drugs is, first, don't do it. Second, don't do it. Third, but if you do it, there's some things I want you to know. Because my bottom line as your parent who loves you to death ultimately is not did you or didn't you. My bottom line is, are you going to come home safely at the end of the night and grow up and make me healthy grandkids? That's my bottom line. It's about safety, not about use per se.
And with regards to use, the longer it's delayed, the less the harm, the less
We
the
all agree on
likelihood that they're going to run into difficulties.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we have to cut it off. If we go any longer, we'll cut into our reception where we all want to go drink wine because it makes us feel good.
Okay.
I'd like to thank this panel, particularly Ethan and Peter, who traveled a long distance, Michelle, and the senator who came about 300 meters, and I assured him we will be checking his travel claim very carefully. Would you join me in thanking this panel?
Very good, very good.